Thank you very much. I just love the work, but if I can just pick up from the last thing you said about what you bring to MIT, what you bring back to Boston, back to Cambridge. Could you talk a little more about that? Because one of the things I'm wondering, looking at the work, is this Chinese design, or is it design?
I would say that, first of all, it's design. It is Chinese because it's really made here and for here. But the way it's designed, it doesn't have to be only for China. I think that's the point. As far as MIT is concerned, when I went to MIT, I had an observation, not so much about MIT, I have to say, it's about American architecture education in general. It was so top-down. It was so much about going from theory to practice, which I had a problem. I still do. I really think that architecture is a discipline. It's really rooted in its materiality and tangibility, and then it's very social. So any ideas architecture could have as a theory, it got from really the real world. So when I was a student in the United States, and our professors, some of our professors, and a lot of students were reading Jacques Derrida and so on to generate architecture for God knows where. I didn't understand. I'm afraid I don't share that. Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear you talk a bit more about the building where you used rammed earth on your walls, and being a tradition that has been lost as a practical knowledge for a lot of artisans, let alone other people working in construction, and how you went about researching that methodology, and specifically what it cost you in terms of labor hours, both of the workers and yourself, to resuscitate that knowledge.
Yeah. First of all, I know my lecture was very long, but I actually I left out some pretty important things. The reason we used the rammed earth, it wasn't so much because rammed earth is traditional or was traditional, but rather we understood the site was meant to be a park, national or a public rather park, forest park actually. But today, very often that although there is such a plan, but the land is given to a developer to do something, and then the developer, of course, will not. Of course, they wouldn't do a park, right? And then they would do, in this case, actually housing. So, and then also we know the lifespan of a building in China today. If it's something like Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, officially the building would only need to last for 25 years. It's a reality. It sounds awfully short for the money you put in, right? But that's a reality. It means that after 25 years, the building, it's not, the building wouldn't collapse or anything, but rather the building would be, demolished maybe for another purpose. So if that's the case, I wonder maybe we should really think about, what happens beyond 20, 25 or 30 years. Maybe the building we design also should go, really. So if it's a building made of earth, so we would leave, probably less, debris on the side. So it's a naive thought, but we pursued it, and that's that. And then the process, it wasn't easy, as I mentioned during the talk. It was actually rather difficult. we finished the project in 2002. I think that was the year. So our office was awfully young, and then we got a lot of recipes as to how to mix the earth and other ingredients. They were hemp fiber. It's a kind of a hemp you can't really smoke, and then you make some good use of it. And then also plaster and so on. But those recipes from Germany, from Switzerland, Korea, and so on, they were useful. But as references, we had to really make a lot of samples ourselves. So that's why our office, we're not thinking of being, let's be idyllic. We actually started by saying we need all these grants to make mock-ups and to experiment with materials and construction methods. So, and after we made some good samples, and then that was the time to convince our client, who actually is a good friend of lots of people here. And Chang invited her to come to my office. Meanwhile, we prepared a set of drawings with concrete blocks, just in case the client, after all, she's a client. If she says no, so we're going to do concrete. If she says yes, so we'll go for the rammed earth. So because rammed earth was being discussed for a while, so of course she would have doubt, right? She never saw a rammed earth building, neither did we. So and she came, and we invited her. I invited her to kick on the rammed earth wall, and she did a very good job and hurt herself a bit. I think she go boom, and then all right, it is very solid. It's hard like rock, and then she was convinced right on the spot, and then the construction team wouldn't collaborate. It's just a hassle for them. They don't. That's one of the problems. Today, the construction force still they don't take much pride in their work. They're interested in the profit, however large or little, and then they don't accumulate knowledge, because most of them are farmers. They would go home and they would build whatever buildings they know how to build. They don't really want to learn. So we worked with them, and eventually, we were able to also get them to work with us. But it's not a very easy process. It's I say I use the word convincing, but sometimes our clients and our collaborators, including the construction people, I don't know if they were convinced. We were so crazy that sometimes they were moved. They said, "All right, I'll let you try once. If it didn't work, and then that's it." So, and then we kind of work like that for a lot of projects. Sometimes something even simple, like the glass blocks in concrete masonry units, is not covered by the code. So it means that by law, you can't do it. So the reason we did it, we had to get the agreement of the client to make full mock-ups of walls, to get a lot of experts in the field to examine it and say it's actually okay, and now it's in the code. We could do it that way. It took a lot of time, and so on. I really appreciate the willingness on the client's part for just something slightly out of the conventional. Yes.
I have a question regarding the Tianmen project you talked about, because we know the area used to be a residential area, and you said you were going to make it public and commercial. I'm just wondering if you were concerned about what would happen to the residents.
Yeah. That question we have more often than all the other questions, as you can imagine, especially from, rightfully, from the, people from other parts of the world.
Well, actually, I think my grandma used to live in that area, and she was displaced because of all the urban planning.
So am I. I was displaced so many times in the city. So my whole life is about moving from the center of Beijing out. Every time it's further out. Now I'm close to the Fifth Ring myself. Yeah. And then let me answer your question. It's of course that question is always there. But if you put in the picture, so to buy, if it's housing units, because we're a market economy, right? Talking about a relentless market economy. So housing units would be in the neighborhood of tens of millions of US dollars. We don't have even real public housing projects, even in lesser areas. So if it's a housing project, just imagine how few families could live there, and half of the families probably would be the chief representative of multi-international companies in realities. So having the project to become commercial, people like myself, like your grandma, we can go in there, sit in the courtyard, have a cup of tea and leave. But yet, this is better to have projects entirely, closed off to people. To have the people who live there and continue to live there, that's really beyond the overall system. So I don't know who you can, in a way address to really change that. You're changing the whole system, the whole economical, political, social system. That's how big that question is. So in reality, I'm looking forward to be in that area having my cup of tea. But to say to live there is extremely difficult. But I still appreciate the question, though. I wonder, because that's that's probably 4 steps ahead of the reality. But what's really important, behind your question is that let's have public housing projects. It could be on the periphery of the city, but it's designed in an intelligent way, built cheaply only for people who can afford that. In a way, low-income people, retired people. That's what's really at stake. So in a way, I'm not so much concerned with Qianmen, but I'm concerned with really the social welfare system.
Hi. First of all, thanks for your presentation. I like your work very much. Well, I think your idea of possibly big and possibly small is based on the assumption that, which is also your last comment, that an architect is not just to make a building, but to innovate a lifestyle. So my question is, as a designer, how can you make sure you will not be imposed as a specific lifestyle to the end user, just like how they stretch their hands and their body? Instead, you're really to innovate a lifestyle for them.
Yeah, when I say we design the way people live, you have to really be very much aware of that. I was using the word yesterday, I used it again. Rather, it's an imitation. People may accept, may refuse. But also, it's not a rather, special way of living. It's all about, let's be healthier, right? Let's probably, reduce the carbon footprint, not as expense of, your comfort. It's not like to force someone to walk. I'm exaggerating. 10 kilometers to get to work. That that doesn't make sense. But rather, if you work within 10 minutes of walk, from your apartment, would you rather walk in that case? And then you really have to mix That's what I also didn't talk about when I say, 40 meter by 40 meter block. The whole idea is that it's all commercial, on the street level, and then you got apartments on top that, so you are close to where you work. That's it's for part of the creative industry here in Shanghai. So it has to work in a way that, so it's not a religion, it's not like you believe this or not, if you do, you better, change the way you live. But rather, is to say it's just as convenient, as comfortable, and it's healthier, and, it really does you good. And would you be willing to try? If he or she still wants to have a cigarette, that's what the person would do,
Thanks for the talk. For me, as a non-expert and somebody who hasn't done anything or much reading on architecture, it was really quite interesting. I have two linked questions, really. One is the tension between the iconic and the performative or the livable, right? Where, in a way, we non-experts always see architecture as these visible markers, and we have, I think, evoked over these 2 days a lot the tension between, or the difference between, the monumental and the ordinary, right? So what I see in your architecture is really an emphasis on the performative, on the haptic, on the livable, and I wonder if there, or what kind of ways of combining the performative and the iconic would there be? I mean, I think it's a problem of scale, of course, right? The iconic, the monumental, but I think it's also a question of visibility and meaning, signification, versus the kind of haptic meaning or performative meaning you can make sort of like traversing these spaces, right? But they might not be as visible on a kind of architecture history or theory point. And related to that, to the question of visibility and the haptic, I'm really curious about your principles of combining similar elements on the small and the larger scale in terms of, again, the kind of maneuverability for the inhabitants or for the user of these spaces, in terms of there seem to be a lot of elements of repetition, right? But in terms of just composition, I would just be interested to know about or your thoughts on the questions of variation, similarity, because a lot of sort of modern or contemporary architecture that's not maybe high design, right, is very monotonous. And I think that's also part of the non-livability, right? At the same, so I think there's a kind of tension between a repetition that's necessary and a necessary variation. And I just wanted to hear a couple of words on that.
Okay. The first question, architecture that is iconic actually is a different notion than just urban icons, because there are architecture that we're talking about being performative, being also part of urban fabric and so on, and since it probably stands out in some other ways and acquired other meanings, so that eventually it becomes an icon. So you can see, if that's the case, of course, being iconic and being performative don't necessarily, contradict each other. So, and then if a city has icons, have a lot of icons even, and say, it's probably just fine as long as there's also fabric. But if a city only has icons, I'm having a hard time to really imagine that city really work well, because that becomes an exposition, and then without interesting exhibitions inside in a way. So that's the thing. For instance, there was a very intelligent proposal for Berlin maybe a decade ago or so, So it's all about building. You know, when I was talking about city blocks, you know, say a 200-meter square city block. So along the periphery of the block, talking about maybe no more than 8-story buildings. So that's because I forgot the number. Maybe 28 meters is a height limit for urban fabric in Berlin. And then only in the center of the building, for that master plan, there were high-rises. So you can see the high-rises would not be, in a way, right next to the street, so that right next to the people. And then so it could be iconic, you know, could be an object like monumental, but yet, you know, it's through this transition of urban fabric. That's an example. The second question, I think is a pretty difficult one, because if you look at that picture there, imagine at one point, the whole city of Beijing only had one kind of architecture, which was that. I remember in my youth, I walked up at that time, I think it's called Coal Mountain, the little hill actually behind Forbidden City. If you look around, there's only 2 colors. One is a gray roof. It's all 1 story, right? It's like an ocean, and then you have green trees popping out from it. Is it, monotonous? If you grew up within it, you don't really feel that way, I have to say. And then, rather, you think, of course, as a kid, you don't think like that, but, it's pretty much, there's one piece of architecture for the whole city. And then, of course, today, if we built especially the same kind of a lousy architecture and over, and then we really have a big problem. So what do we do? There's no one simple answer, but in practice, and there are a number of ways to kind of to improve, at least, to some extent that. So one thing is to really organize a team of architects to work together on different parts. There are a lot of actually fine European examples, and then we're doing quite a bit here in the in China. So always a team of architects would work on one master plan, so all the individual buildings would turn out differently. So that's actually one of the classic really architectural questions. It's because you can't, in a way, make artificial variations that much just for visual differences, and then only different minds would be able to do it, since different minds would understand architecture differently. But yet, on the other hand, I could almost argue for not monotony, but for consistency, if there is really a consistent quality behind that kind of architecture, which supports certain lifestyle. So I'm being very contradictory, but that's where I am.
Yeah, I'd like just to stand back from your work for a moment and suppose a larger kind of, sort of issue or dilemma. It struck me from some of the things you said, but also thinking about this a bit more abstractly, that cities that are designed or ordered or arise organically, where people are working where they live or close to where they live, as you noticed, where there's a robust public transport system, where people are literally rubbing skin against each other, where people maybe live above shops and so on and so forth, where there's an active kind of social life between the sort of life on the street and life at home, right, interactively. Those cities tend to produce, I would say, or are disposed to producing much more progressive politics than car culture cities, right? I mean, in a sense, car cities are cities cars are an extension of gated communities. They're a gated community of one, or they tend to be an extension of, right? And it's where people are alienated from each other. They roll up the window, they listen to music on the way to work, and so on and so forth. And they have very little relation to others. So the implication of that, it seems to me, in terms of design, is that, and I sort of caught hints of this in some of the things you said, not only designing small, I think that's part of it, obviously. I mean, not high rises, which tend to produce a similar kind of alienation, but also a kind of designing ecologies, right, or ecosystems, as opposed to designing discretely, right? I mean, if you have designing one building that's unrelated to another, and so on and so forth. So, having said that, I wonder whether you've had any conversation with the folks who, say, designed the Eiland community in Amsterdam. You know, that extension of, I don't know if you know, the extension on the water of the city of Amsterdam into new neighborhoods on the canals and so on.
I know a little bit of that. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, some of the sort of open design system that you were talking about sort of struck me as quite similar, both in its use of materials and in its use of extension and so forth. That is also tends to be not very high-rise, right? Are pedestrian or ambulatory or bicycle-driven kinds of, where people are, in a way, you're looking at each other in the eye as you drive by them on a bicycle and so forth. So I wonder if you can comment about that.
I prepared something for Thursday, but no. Why wait? So I let Michael maybe do a solo on Thursday, because it's a very important question. And so, I'm sure at one point you have discussed, really definitions of design. I kind of, in my session yesterday, I talked about it a little bit, and other people did as well. If you remember the conversation, I actually had a problem, although I knew often it was the case, but I had a problem with design as a composition. So here, there's two very important issues for architects and town planners. One is that during the 60s and 70s and 80s, and in the West, there were a lot of debates about if city could be possibly designed. And then I think actually there was a conclusion, and the answer was no. You can't design the city. The city is something much too complex, much too organic, and so on. But for me, after coming back to practice in China and looking at all these problematic new cities, I realized they were all designed. They were just bad design, poor design, wrong design. They were all designed. Someone had a vision. A city should look like this, should work like that, and so on. So, and then that's something very, very important. So the second thing that, but the design means something else. It's not about composition, it's about something else, which I'm just going to describe right now. And then, so today, we are very much concerned with community in China, which is really, it's more or less as a craft of making rammed earth. It's sort of a gone for a while. It's gone since the days of the Cultural Revolution. So we are in need of reconstruction there right away. And then the concern of energy. So there, again, people would say big issues. You can't, you may be able to make a building, a singular building, however big, to make it energy sufficient and so on. But you can't really make a city that way because, again, city is organic, city is complex and so on. But I think that actually it's possible. I'm actually optimistic. And then there are actually very few rules. If you follow, the carbon emission could come down. So there are actually 6 of them. In Chinese, this is 6. So there are 6 rules. The number 1 is mixed functions, mixed use. Mixed living, housing, work, and shopping, right? The carbon footprint is going to come down, and it's more convenient. And then you mix the circulation. If good for land use and good in many ways. Although there are going to be streets, roads only for cars, but there are shared streets and pedestrian streets. And then these are the 2 mixes. And then the issue of scale is very important. It's appropriate scale, and then the issue of density is very important. So if you go to Beijing, the traffic is terrible, and there's a pollution. A lot of people are saying Beijing is too dense. But in terms of floor area ratio, this is the one indicator we use in our field for density. It's only 3, and Manhattan is 6, and Hong Kong is 12. So both cities, both New York and Hong Kong are more livable than Beijing. So the problem with the city of Beijing actually is not dense enough, in parts of it at least. So these are 2 other issues, scale and density. And then the 5th issue is about pedestrian oriented circulation. It's not so much about being healthy even and being energy conscious. Actually, it's about urban pleasure. So if you go from point A to point B for a meeting, you got half an hour. If you take a taxi, you got to wait maybe for 20 minutes. You decided to walk. Why? Because you may run into a sales of your favorite music records and so on, and then you can make incidental shopping. And it's all the urban pleasures of encounter something incidentally would occur when you walk. You may meet someone. You may a lot of things may happen. But in a car, what do? Whatever sale is going on, you can't just stop the car in the street and go get it. And then the last point is that when you have the public transportation, you have to have that. And you have the bicycles, you have the private cars, you have the segways, everything. And design the way they are connected. Connection is super important. When you get off the plane, you should be able to get onto a subway within maybe 10 minutes max and then get into the city. You come up and then you retrieve your bicycle from the subway station and then you go home and so on. So that can be designed. Once you design it, you don't miss driving to the airport. So that's the whole point, So if you follow those rules, how much carbon emission you're cutting down, I have no idea. But I know it's going to be better than the way we are. Because today we are living through a high carbon stage in China. This whole development in the past 3 decades is hard carbon based. It cannot be sustained. But the point is that let's not to bullshit about zero carbon, whatever. And then you say, that's too high a goal, let's forget about it. It's not realistic. It is not realistic. But let's take the one small step right now, is to do these very simple things in town planning to get the carbon number to come down right away. I think that's something really exciting. We're trying to really convince some of our clients and authorities to really to make some, in a way, almost model projects. Actually, the 40 by 40 project is somehow one of those projects.
I now know why your clients think you're crazy, and at the same time want to give you a chance to work. Because, for example, I think your idea of the two M's, metropolis and materiality, that your notion of the material is actually very interesting and ambiguous at the same time. Because, I mean, it's like you're telling us that in the face of the disappearing city, you can't really hold on to, for example, a lot of material structures, material buildings. That what you want to replicate then would be, as you say, a certain kind of experience and a certain type of urban fabric. But you want to retain the experience while at the same time the certain material forms for these experiences, like Xiao. I mean, all these are now disappearing and have been bulldozed. So, how it's like to some extent what you're calling the material, right? The importance of the material is also at the same time the importance of the immaterial, because, for example, if we get back to this question of the iconic, the iconic, at least from one angle, is something you can see. Right? The point about this thing that you're after, which I think is crazy and very interesting, right? How to sort of reproduce or replicate or as it were, reinvent both the experience and the fabric under completely different conditions. And it's like the examples you've showed us of some of your work, right, seem to be a kind of interesting and also difficult attempt to do this, right? To as it were, insist on certain material conditions, right? When these conditions are disappearing, so that what you're actually also aiming to do, to preserve the experience. I mean, that is passionate, crazy, idealistic, but also very worthwhile. But that seems to be where you are.
But I think, I don't need to answer your question. It's a comment and an observation. I just wanted to add one thing. So once the building is built, they're going to be open to interpretations, so that you don't really have control how people will see it in any way. And so on the other hand, of course, you don't want to use architecture in a rhetorical way, so to argue only for something, right? But on the other hand, architecture is cultural, and then there are going to be obvious references in that regard. So for us, what's really difficult is to achieve the balance. There's never a case that we know for sure we got there. In fact, that's one of the things. It only if it's balanced or not, and could only occur when the building was already completed and sitting there for a while. And then, of course, and what if it's really not working? You can't change a damn thing. So it's like that. That's why being an architect, I learned to sleep with regrets and imperfection and so on. Sorry.
永和，我问你一个特别业余的问题哈，你当我的翻译。
好。Okay, she's gonna ask you a question. I'll translate for her.
那个我不敢问，要是阿克伯不说话，我刚才不敢问。因为那个，我就想问你你那个有一个城市全是灰的，然后像碉堡似的那个城市，那是哪儿？
那个是在北京的。就是上帝高科技园
啊，你那个是不是跟长城的建筑有关系？我就问你这个。
I think she's asking for about the the computer software R&D campus and she's asking if I made a reference to the Great Wall.
因为特别像长城烽火台。
Looks like the beacon towers of the Great Wall. The answer is simple: no. It's not. See, for me, because I studied, there's something for people who are not in architecture may want to know. I think actually we are living in a post. Yesterday we were talking about post-capitalist society. That's not China. We're in full speed of capitalist development. But I think we are at the same time not only China but the world more or less. Most parts of the developed and semi-developed world. We're in a postmodernist era because we are living with ambiguity, contradiction, and other conditions very complex and so on. And then postmodernist architecture in its heydays in the 80s and early part of 90s were all about making very direct, often almost caricature-like reference to historic buildings and classical architecture and so on, and that was so so flat. It was the building design of stage set. So people today in architecture regard the word postmodernism as a dirty word. You never say, if you're truly a postmodernist, you have to hide in a closet and so on. But yet, with all the social scientists, the way postmodernism really describes the conditions of the world we are living in, for me, is the one actually I operate from. So, because of this kind of complexity and ambiguity and so on, contradiction, I don't see our work making direct reference to other work. But indirectly, there are a lot of references. That's why, I'm saying no to that, but I'm being very open. I don't really have a good example for Solar. But I'm thinking all these movies, right? Making a reference is like in The Untouchables, making a reference to Battleship Potemkin. It was just a brilliant thing. I wish I know how to do that.
不，永和，我是想夸你。我是想夸你，因为可能你自己就是就是你的那个些概念特别强，就是 你坚决的不想去追随这个就是这种特别陈词滥调的这种概念建筑的概念，非得要有一个地方化什么的。但是因为你太知道传统的东西了，我就在你的所有建筑的那些小细节里边，就能感觉到那些都藏在下边。就是你对所有的这些传统建筑的概念，其实都是藏在下面。我想这是最好的一种美学的方式，不是那种陈词滥调，就觉得中国的建筑必须是什么样，或者哪个国家的必须什么样。但是你那些小细节，全部是我能看到是从一个什么东西来的，我就是这种感觉，所以我问你，夸你呢。
Okay.
你翻译啊。
So she's saying that she saw some of these references more hidden behind rather than just up front. That's what we wish to achieve, really. Yeah. Okay, there's one last question.
Thank you. I really appreciate your talk. I enjoy it a lot, and I'm just fascinated by the sort of the implication that an architect being operating this city as a social laboratory. And so my question is, do you feel that you have a lot of responsibility because you have to, just based on the talk and this discussion, that you have to think about the ecology and even the experience of the people who use those space. Do you, I know that in China especially, you don't have a lot of sort of public consultations. And in North America, even a condo building, a shopping mall, theoretically at least, the public has to be consulted, even though in reality, we know that doesn't really work that well and people don't really care. But in any case, in China, you don't even have that. So my question is that, this is really a question of sort of the political and the ethical implications. Being in a position where you have to take care of so many things, do you worry about that power? And do you feel there's a responsibility for it? And also, would you, like personally as an architect, would you prefer actually that there are in fact some kind of public input, some kind of democratic process, even though the implication is that it would be people who know nothing about architecture will come in? So there's a question of, do you really trust the expertise that really is the way to do it, or you would prefer in fact have some form of public input even though they would know nothing about it?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very interesting question. So the bigger question behind it that is really the democratic system. Democracy is a system, by the way, as we all know. So first of all, so that we do have a lot of responsibilities, and which is regulated as it should be by also another system. By the system of registration and so on. So we are people today in China, because actually architects, I have to say, we enjoy a higher status than architects, say, in the United States. So we actually share a bit of the media exposures, and not that bit, but still probably more than architects in the U.S. and so on. So that we in a way we have almost a slightly bigger impact on some of these issues besides the individual projects. But yet there is no channel for an architect not only to have the interaction with a certain population, and then also we don't even have we have the chance to really serve certain people. I think the question you asked really has to do with a system that would allow us not only to really have the opportunities to have dialogue with the people who are so people all would use buildings, but rather to really share the knowledge of architecture so that, from their point of view, they would have the access to architecture and actually just for this symposium, really to design. So in a way, it's I guess I'm just saying it's a matter of a two-way traffic. We hear, what they want, they actually would be able to use our service. That's been a really difficult issue because apparently we don't have public hearing. We don't even have, the grassroots organizations such as Urban Center. I don't know if, I know there's a lot of American cities, New York City, San Francisco, they have a very active urban center which would help to make exactly the kind of a connection we make. So anyway, having said that, so the next question is, why can't we have these kind of organizations? I think actually we can. It's going to be totally grassroots. It wouldn't be able to help the architects, the common people to connect to the government. Maybe the American, urban centers would be able to do, but yet would help to do what I just mentioned, to get a dialogue between the professionals and the common folks, and then also to make knowledge of architecture available to people, free of charge. So that actually could happen. So we'll see. I don't have this is the truth. I don't have the energy to do it by myself. But if anyone wants to start an urban center in Shanghai or Beijing, I'm more than happy to help out, to be part of it.